What they're saying is that North Korea is not willing to talk to the United States unless they have some concessions first around the restrictions that are currently in place, the sanctions that are currently in place. Now, some of them are things that seem quite understandable for a country that is facing an acute food shortage. They want to be able to import more refined fuel. They want to do more exporting of materials. But some of the stuff that's caught the headlines is around lifting some of the sanctions on what are referred to as luxury goods. And these are things like fine suits or expensive alcohol, which the regime uses to reward those people at the top. And obviously that's attracted attention for the wrong reasons. But at the moment, what North Korea is saying is they're not willing to talk denuclearization. They're not willing to talk to the United States at all unless the United States first looks at sanction relief.
Yes, they're of course facing severe food shortages and questions around how much COVID is in the country. What do you think then brought them to this point?
Yeah, it does look like the country is in a dire predicament. I mean, they themselves, the leader Kim Jong-un has said that the country is on the edge of a great crisis. Part of the other information that we received from this briefing by the South Korean spy agency is that they have had to actually use some of the stores that they have in place, the emergency stores that are supposed to be there for times of conflict, in order to feed the population. And a lot of analysts who we speak to say they are really just one natural disaster away to another famine, which could replicate, at least in part, what we saw back in the 1990s. So it does look like they're in a desperate economic situation. Their restrictions that they put in place in order to avoid the ravages of COVID-19 might have been successful, at least according to them. There's no COVID within the country, and it does look likely that there at least hasn't been major outbreaks. But it has meant that they've been unable to trade, even with China, to get things that they need for agriculture. So they are desperate for some sort of sanctions relief, and that might mean that they're more motivated to negotiate both with the United States and with South Korea.
It's also against the backdrop of South Korea and the US resuming military exercises in the region. How is that playing into the current dynamic?
Yeah, so this does seem to be coming to a crunch point. So each summertime, the United States and South Korea have military exercises. There are still about 30,000 US troops stationed in South Korea. Last year, they were interrupted because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and this year the plan was for them to be mostly computer-based. But even that would be seen as a provocation by North Korea. And again, they've kind of drawn a line in the sand about this issue. We heard from Kim Jong-un's sister, Kim Yo-jong, last week, suggesting any move by South Korea to participate in what they describe as hostile war games would test their resolve for wanting to negotiate and to wanting to talk directly to South Korea. It was only last week that we had confirmation that the two sides have actually been communicating, at least in letter form, between the North and South. They are still ignoring the United States, and they have effectively ignored the Biden administration since they came to power earlier this year. And although South Korea seems to be willing to make concessions to get North Korea back to the negotiating table, North Korea doesn't really want to talk to South Korea. They understand it's the United States that will decide whether or not sanctions can be lifted, and so they want a direct line with the United States.
Yeah, but how interested is the United States? Do they see North Korea as a priority?
I think the feeling among analysts is that Joe Biden has a lot of issues on his hands to deal with. He's very domestically focused, but also even at a foreign policy level, there are probably bigger issues for him to deal with. And so it doesn't seem to be a high priority at this point. But they have said that they are willing to put everything back on the table. So they are willing to talk to North Korea, not necessarily suggesting there's going to be a summit between the leaders at any point soon, but they are willing to talk to them and they want to try diplomacy. So it is an issue that's on their radar. They've put work into it earlier this year, but it's from the South Korean side that there's a real sense of urgency. It's the last year of President Moon Jae-in's term, and he really wants to have some sort of legacy when it comes to relations between the two Koreas, and he's putting all the diplomatic pressure he can on the United States to get them to at least help South Korea get North Korea back to the table.